Intersection of two arrays, part 2. In this problem, we're given two integer arrays nums1 and nums2, and we need to return an array of their intersection. Each element in the result must appear as many times as it shows in both arrays, and you may return the result in any order. So in other words, what we have to do is we need to create an array and store elements that appear in both arrays nums1 and num2, and we need to return them the minimum number of times that they appear in each array. In other words, since here we have two 2's and here we have two 2's, then in our output we need to return two 2's, and obviously we don't return the 1's because they don't exist in nums2, they only are within nums1. So in example 2 we have nums1 is 495 and nums2 is 94984. We're going to take a look at the 4. Does 4 appear in both arrays? It's in nums1 obviously. And in nums2, yes it does. It appears twice. But since here it appears twice and here it only appears once, and we can only return it once in the output. So basically we need to return the elements that appear in both arrays and the number of times that they appear in both arrays. Here we have a 9, and we have a 9 here, yes, so we also need to return 9 within our array. As for the 5 only exists in this array, it doesn't exist here, so there's no 5. So the way we're going to solve this is we're going to create two maps, and within each map we're going to store the values in each array. So our first map is going to contain the values within nums1 as its key, and its value is going to be the frequency of key, so the number of times that our key appears in our array. So for example, nums1, our map would contain 1, and it's pointing to 2 because it appears twice. Similarly, we're going to have a key 2 with value 2 since it appears twice. In our second map, we'd have our key 2 and the number of times it appears as its value, which is also 2. Also, before we begin coding, we need to address how we're going to return an array output. They're going to give us two int arrays, nums1 and nums2. However, the problem is we don't necessarily know the values that appear in both lists, if they do at all, and a minimum number of times that they appear in each list. And in order to create an array in Java, we need to give it a size, which we can't do because, like I said, we don't know what values exist in both arrays. So instead, to address this, we're going to create a list of integers instead. And as we find numbers that appear in both arrays, we're going to add those values into that list, because for lists in Java, we do not need to set a size. And then in the end, we're going to convert our list into an array. So with our maps, like I said, as a key, they're going to store the numbers within the array, and the value for each key is going to be the number of times that it appears in that array. Now with these two maps, we're going to loop through the keys of one of those maps, and then we're going to check if the other map contains the key which we're currently on, and if it does, we need to add to our map that key n amount of times, where n is the amount that it appears in both arrays, or the minimum number of times that it appears in our two arrays. So with the groundwork laid out, let's go ahead and begin. Like I said, we need to create two maps, so let's do that now. So map integer to integer called map1 is equal to new hash map, and similarly we're going to create another map for map2, and also while we're at it, we'll create the list that we're going to store the numbers in. So list integer list equals new array list. Now we're going to add our numbers into our map and the number of times that they appear in each map. So let's begin with map1. Let's begin storing values for map1. So for every number, every int num in nums1, map.put, so put in our map, as a key we'd put num, and as for its value, the frequency of how many times num appears in our array nums1, we're going to do map, or actually this should be map1. So map1 dot get or default num or 0 plus 1. And obviously we're going to do the same for the second map, except we're going to look at nums2 instead. So very quickly, what are we doing in this line, or in these two lines of code? For the first for loop, we're storing key value pairs in our map1, which is going to be key value pairs for the array nums1. We're literally putting the number which we're currently on as we iterate for within the for loop as our key, and as its value, we're putting map1.getterDefault num0 plus 1. So what we're doing is we're saying that if the number which we're currently on already exists in our map, then get its value, so get num. Otherwise, give it a value of 0. And then finally, regardless of whether we get or we default, we need to add 1 so we can account for the current number which we're on. So now we need to iterate through one of our key sets. It doesn't really matter if we do map 1 or map 2, so let's just do map 1. So for every int key in map 1 dot key set, what are we going to do? We're going to check if map 2 contains this key. So key. So if it does contain that key, what are we going to do? We need to add it to our list the minimum number of times that it appears in either map 1 or map 2. So to illustrate, in example 2, in nums1 we have 4, 9, and 5, and nums2 has 9, 4, 9, 8, 4. 9 appears once in nums1, but it appears twice in nums2. Since it doesn't appear twice in nums2, then we can't return 2 9s in our array. We can only return 1. That's why we're going to take the minimum value of the key which we're currently on. We're going to see if the minimum value is in map 1 or map 2, and we're going to add it a minimum number of times within our new list. So if map2 dot contains key, then for int, a new int called y equals to 0, as long as y is less than math.min between what? map1 dot get key. Find me the minimum value between map1 dot get key and map2 dot get key, and obviously we need to increment y. So by doing this, we're strictly setting y to be exactly less than the minimum value of that key. So, and when we start at 0, so in example 2, 9 appears once and in nums1, and it appears twice in nums2. What's the minimum between 1 and 2? That's 1. So at y equals to 0, we're going to add list.add key. And then after this statement, we're going to go back to our for loop, increment y. Now it's equal to 1. Again, we're going to add the key which we're on to our list. And then y equals to 2, and we exit this for loop. So finally, we need to exit this for loop, and we need to convert our list into an array. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to create an int. We can call this output, which is equal to new int with the size of list.size. And then for int I equals to 0, as long as I is less than output dot length I plus plus. Output at I is going to be equal to list dot get I, and then finally we just need to return output. So let's submit our code and see if it works. Perfect. So that was the intersection of two arrays part 2 in Java. I hope you found that video helpful, and thanks for watching.